Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. It's the same game development series you know and love, just with a new name and coat of paint. And to celebrate this occasion, I thought we'd dive into something new. Now recently, I've noticed a resurgence of the Tetris-like physics puzzler, Tricky Towers. And for those of you who have been watching a while, probably already know that lately I've been dipping my toes into games using physics. Which brings us to the plan for this project. We're going to simply try recreating Tricky Towers in GameMaker. We'll use GameMaker's physics system to get the job done, and hopefully learn a thing or two about said system in the process. And today we'll simply focus on the basic foundation of the Tetris-like experience. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. Now, before we begin, I'll admit that a lot of work was done before recording. Allow me to explain. GameMaker's physics system is interesting, to say the least. Physical objects are bound by something called fixtures, which control everything from collisions to the actual physical properties of that object. The problem I've been having all this time is getting these fixtures to work, especially like I keep seeing it claimed on the internet. Well, if you've ever been in a similar situation, allow me to bestow some knowledge upon you. Now, binding fixtures is extremely tedious. Anytime you want to alter an aspect of a physical object, the current fixture needs to be replaced completely. Meaning, even if you just want to change one property, the entire fixture needs to be rebuilt. Every single time. That is, unless you're defining the collision shape for the object, which is just a whole other can of worms I'm not even gonna bother getting into. Now the problem is defining these collisions outside of simple circles or rectangles are just painful. So in order to build complex collision shapes, you need to break them down into polygonal parts, which need to be added point by point. Now this isn't anything new for anyone who has worked with primitives or vertices before. However, the kicker here is that every single physical property needs to be redefined for each and every group of points. Otherwise, the entire effort is evidently for naught. And to get just an idea of how absurd this can get, here's an actual screenshot of what to expect from an official introduction tutorial from Yo-Yo Games for GameMaker's physics. So, rant aside, since the Tetris pieces are basically two rectangles rearranged in different configurations, I created a function to do that math for me. Then, using another function, the physical properties needed would be injected at the end. Which brings us to this. The ability for the Tetris pieces to drop and react using GameMaker's physics system. And we haven't even got to any actual new code yet. So let's move on with today's session. In the HUD object, variables for current active piece, drop speed, and piece positions were added. Then in the step event, if a piece has yet to spawn, one would spawn at the default center of the screen. The piece would also spawn with physics turned off so we could control the drop speed. And once the piece has reached the floor or another piece, physics are re-enabled, resetting the process. Then moving on to the shape object, the controls to move active pieces were added. I wasn't sure the best way to approach this, so a switch was used. Left and right would move the piece, while up and down would rotate the piece. And none of this would work. Not only were the controls not working, but there was a noticeable delay when shapes transitioned back to their physical state. So back in the shape code, I modified the controls a bit and swapped out the normal X, Y, and angles for their physics-based counterparts, which, to my surprise, fixed the issue. Outside of the obvious transition, shapes could now be controlled via key prompts. And it's here that I then realized that the controls were wrong. So back in the shape code, the down key event was modified. Using its own drop speed variable, when the down key is pressed, it would increase the shape's drop speed. And when released, it would default back to the regular drop speed stored in the HUD controller. Next, to fix a weird teleporting issue that kept popping up, the X position offset was reset on spawn of the next piece. This would fix the issue of shapes sometimes teleporting around the play area. So now that our controls were working like they should, that dang delay in the transition needed to be addressed, which was clearly occurring due to the fact that all pieces were stored in a single sprite. Unfortunately, place meeting didn't seem to work as hoped, so it was replaced with the physics-based equivalent. First with a check for the floor. The results were positive, with shapes behaving as one would hope when it came to the floor. So the same code was applied to the shape objects, and, well, it did not work. Which I assume is because the code is also counting itself. So finally, after a ton of time trying everything I could think, a return to the place reading checks was made. This time, instead of just using X and Y positions, the physics equivalents were used. And again, just like that, the headache endured for the last 10 minutes or so were for nothing, as the code now worked perfectly fine. There were no longer weird delays due to transitions, and the shapes all behaved as you would expect a clone of Tricky Towers to work. Well, kind of. It's pretty clear that the physical properties of these shapes need tweaking, not to mention all the other things I wasn't able to get to today thanks to a ton of uncertainties. For example, all the time I assumed the physics-based commands only worked with physics-enabled objects, but I was apparently very wrong on that front. So yeah, we've got a lot of things left to add to make this truly a Tricky Tower-like experience, which we'll have to get to next time. But for now, that'll have to do it for this episode of the Dev Diary. If you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already. And what about you? Have you ever tried remaking Tricky Towers for yourself? What did you think of today's process? Leave your thoughts and stories in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.